Hi, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Playbook. My name is Dr. Janelle Abela, and I talk about human interaction and learning theory. And today we're talking about sports. We want to talk about the connection between sports and the workplace, what we can learn from sports, and what sports can learn about psychological safety. When we think about sports and we think about the workplace, there's a huge disconnect because sport is seen as fun and work is often seen as an obligation. When we look at the difference and then we can see that there's kind of a morale issue. Why do people want to be a part of sports? Why do people want to be engaged in sports? And why don't they want that in the workplace? Why are there challenges that exist? There's a few things we can look to sport to better understand why there's challenges in the workplace, because both spaces are building people's capacity. They're people collaborating, they're innovating, and they're competing. But the biggest difference is the real-time reality check of where you're at, what you're doing, and how you can improve. We're going to start by talking about what is happening in sports that we can learn from in the workplace. And the first one is the application of learning. We're seeing a challenge in the workplace where learning is still theoretical. It's not conceptual. We're not seeing the shift in training becoming application. It starts all the way from the onboarding process. People are engaging with textbook training, online training modules. They're given SOPs and training manuals that are just kind of them to the learning material, or they're given direct instruction. Follow us around the organization, learn about this, learn about this, learn about this, and then they're put into the position to apply it themselves. We're not seeing that application engagement process in onboarding, and you don't see that application throughout the life cycle of someone's career either. So if you're going to be engaging in workplace engagement, it has to be conceptual and not just theoretical. So you can apply a big new idea into the workplace, but you can't just speak about it abstractly. A big challenge with this right now is respectful workplaces or inclusive workplace programs, because we're seeing that shift from trying to understand what it looks like to doing it. Instead of just being told you have to be inclusive or equitable or respectful, you have to see what that looks like in the workplace and learn to apply it alongside leadership. What's not happening is that application piece. So we're even in some training sessions, people are taught you speak this way, or you act this way, or you collaborate this way, but you have to do it in action. You have to have team engagement activities. Not only does that build culture, but it gives people the opportunity to take those phrases that they're learning and put them right into action. Take the skills of collaborating with a team to solve a problem and putting it into action. And that's probably the one big shift that I've taken in the way that I engage with organizations. I teach them a concept, whether it's bias or if it's perspective taking, and then I show them what it looks like in a low risk activity. So I give them the opportunity to hear the concept, the theory, understand why it's important and how it impacts their day-to-day or their job. And then I show them what it looks like. So whether that's collaborating to build a cup tower, or if they're playing a game of who's the odd one out, or whatever it may be, they're given the opportunity to apply it in real life, test those skills, and then analyze what they've just learned in practice. When we look at athletics, that's often done. They're not just sitting there with the playbook and reading it over and over again. They're not just reading how to perform a new move or how to drive a car or how to do a flip in gymnastics. They're given the opportunity to learn about it, but then they're applying it, they're testing it, they're trying it. And then they get feedback in real time. And that's the second piece that's really important when we talk about the workplace is we don't do real-time feedback. And when I say real-time feedback, I say it's the same day, the same week, the same month, sometimes the same quarter. A lot of workplaces work in hindsight and they work very siloed and separate when it comes to feedback structures because feedback is seen as something that needs to be given when people do things wrong, corrective measures and corrective behavior. But that's not always the case. Sometimes we need to look at how feedback can be positively engaging, how it can be done in real time, and how we create an environment that allows that feedback to happen. And the environment is so critical. In athletics, we think, okay, this is normal. You're going to try something and get some improvement tips and tricks on how to shoot your shot better, or how to get around that corner better, or how to land your jump better. And that is normal because in athletics, you're testing the dynamics, you're testing the physics, you're looking at the science behind the sport. There's lots of data that's collected. People are looking at game film from every single angle because you're trying to see how you can adjust your body or the machine so simply to do better next time. In the workplace, not only do we not collect a lot of that data, but we don't take the opportunity to review it. Ever in a lot of spaces. We're not looking at problems from multiple angles. We're not seeking contributions from multiple stakeholders. And we're certainly not asking people why they fail, why they're struggling, and how they can be better supported to improve. Maybe if you have an athlete who gets past the ball and then they miss the shot, they could make a comment on, oh, well, if the other players did XYZ. But when you're looking in the workplace, you may not look at that process system. Is how was something passed to them? Was the documentation error done 3 steps back? Was there a communication error? Was there an issue with the product itself and that they didn't have the knowledge on how to address the defect? Is there an issue with customer service? Is it the customer? Because in our spaces, we have these conversations in athletics. Maybe you have a really bad fan and you're talking about how that is affecting the player. But in the workplace, are we talking about having a really bad customer and how that's affecting the employee? Probably not. So when we talk about feedback versus instruction, we need to be doing feedback cyclically and sometimes first, because instruction is something that is compliance based. It's giving someone a directive and encouraging them to follow that directive along that line. If we're giving people the opportunity to have that to-be feedback throughout the process, even during instruction or ahead of instruction, you're giving the opportunity to problem solve and innovate along the way. And that's something that we can start to integrate in the workplace for higher efficiency, for reduced risk, and for more innovation in the long term. When we look at the workplace, we can also consider if there's readiness. Readiness is determined from a variety of different capacities. When we look at situational leadership models and we talk about readiness in the workplace, we need to talk about skills and knowledge and confidence and motivation. The confidence and motivation piece is something that we lack not just in the workplace, but sometimes in athletics as well, because this is tied to psychological safety. So we're going to get into psychological safety in a minute, and we're going to look at some sports examples, but I want to talk about how athletics creates an environment where confidence and motivation and skills and knowledge, that pieces of situational leadership, are more welcomed. And that's done by differentiation of drills and skill development and doing it in different ways, which reflects learning differences in the workplace, and also recognizing that mistakes are natural. In athletics, we see diversification of testing. So they do diversification of various drills, diversification of skills development, diversification of team development. And that diversification is giving people the opportunity to be developed in the way that works best for them, but also it gives them that comprehensive understanding of a approach. When we do this in the workplace, it's often that linear training model. We don't have an account for learning differences, whether people absorb more hands-on, they absorb more visually, they absorb more through a written text or an audio. When we see this in athletics, we're watching game film, listening to instruction, watching other people do it. People are watching us do it, and then they're following. They're seeing all of the different angles and components of that skill development, of that knowledge development. And that is paired with the confidence and motivation of you're doing it, you're trying it, you're testing it, you're being supported, you're being given feedback along the way. If you don't have both pieces of that readiness development, then you have people going into onto a job site or into a job where they have the knowledge, they have the skill, they have a certification, or they have a degree or diploma, they did the training, they watched the 65 modules online, but they don't have that confidence and motivation because they haven't gotten buy-in, they haven't gotten the opportunity to test it, and they haven't gotten the approval because that feedback cycle doesn't exist. They're waiting for that 9 month or 6 month, sorry, the 3 month review for to know if they're going to keep their job. They're waiting for a 6 month review to know if they are going to maybe get an opportunity to get an extended contract. They're going to wait for a 1 year review. They have to go through a promotional process if they want to go to a different job. They get that hindsight feedback, and it may not be a career development process or an individual development process that's going to give them that real-time feedback in line with their development that you would see in sports. The other piece there is the mistakes component. Mistakes are seen as something that is a go-to in athletics. You know there's going to be errors. You know you can't win every game. Some people do win every game. If you watch college football, you see that the Hoosiers just won the college football playoffs, and they did win every game. But that's not always the case because even winning every game, you don't catch every pass and you don't always get a touchdown on every drive. There's going to be losses and errors and mistakes. But in athletics, we take the time to reflect on that, grow on that, think about it. And in the workplace, it's very individualized and very mistake as error, as problem, as failure driven. And we don't take it as a learning opportunity as much as we could. And so when we're talking about the comparison between sports and the workplace, we really need to reframe how the individual is being assessed, how they're being developed, how other people are contributing to that assessment and development, and how we create an environment for growth where people want to grow, can grow, and are encouraged to grow. And all of that surrounds psychological safety. Psychological safety is someone's ability to contribute. It's their ability to exercise the skills and knowledge that they have developed and do it with that confidence and motivation. When someone has psychological safety, that means they're seen, heard, and valued. And you do that by recognizing individual needs and differences, by hearing what they need as in response to those individual needs and differences, and then valuing them as an individual by putting those responses in place. So if you know that someone needs some extra support or they learn better a certain way, it's about recognizing that, putting it in place, and then showing them, we value you. We value you as a part of this team. And so we're going to support you in the way that works best for you. It's about equal opportunity. And so when we each have that equal opportunity to succeed and contribute, we develop that psychological safety. This is really critical for athletics and for the workplace because when people don't have psychological safety, they may struggle to contribute, to share their ideas, to feel like they can provide information that could be very pertinent and important for an organization. When psychological safety exists, it means that someone's being validated and valued within that organization. It doesn't mean that what they're saying is going to be put into action. It doesn't mean that what they're saying has to be the next move or the next priority. What it means is that you have allowed them to contribute. You've created a space where they feel like they can contribute without fear. They don't think they're going to get made fun of. They don't think that they're going to lose their job or their position. They don't feel like they're going to have risks as a result of contributing. And those risks can be perceived risks. I may feel like my team members don't appreciate me. I may feel like my ideas go unheard. And so psychological safety is responsive to the environment. It's responsive to communication, to feedback pathways, and the way that people engage. But it is that perception of that environment. So that open door policy of saying, my door's always open, people can always come talk to me. That's the intention of creating a psychologically safe environment because you're saying people can always contribute. But the perceived risk is more important when we're talking about psychological safety because maybe your office is in the middle of a bullpen and everyone is going to see when someone comes to talk to you. And they don't want that pressure from their peers of, why are you reporting something? What are you saying? Are you talking about something? Are you complaining? Whose side are you on? And so the perceptions can be very different. And that's a two-way conversation that has to happen to understand Why do people contribute? Why don't they contribute? What about the environment is making them feel at risk of humiliation or embarrassment, or maybe their position? What is the risk that is perceived? What aspects of the environment are creating that risk, and how can that be adjusted? Now, there's a couple of videos that I want to watch with you because I think they're really important to emphasize that psychological safety exists in athletics. There's conversations about it, but sometimes the language is different. And so, from the athletics perspective, psychological safety needs to be developed more explicitly, and we can learn about how psychological safety is affecting our workplaces from these types of conversations. So, let's take a look at the first one.
Recruiting enthusiastic kids is harder than it's ever been because every kid watches TV and they watch the NBA or they watch Major League Baseball or they watch the NFL, whatever sport they watch, WNBA, it doesn't matter. And what they see is people just being really cool. So they think that's how they're going to act. And they haven't even figured out which foot to use as a pivot foot, and they're going to act like they're really good players. You see it all the time. You see it at every AAU tournament. You see it every high school game. So recruiting kids that are like really upbeat and loving life and love the game and have this tremendous appreciation for when their teammates do something well, that's hard. That's hard. It's really hard. So on our team, me, my coaching staff, we put a huge premium on body language. And if your body language is bad, you will never get in the game. Ever. I don't care how good you are. If somebody says, well, you just benched Stewie for, 35 minutes in the Memphis game a couple years ago. Yeah, I did. Oh, that was to motivate her for the South Carolina game the following Monday. No, it wasn't. Stewie was acting like a 12-year-old. So I put her on the bench and said, sit there. It doesn't matter on our team. Now, the other coaches might say, well, you can do that because you got 3 other, All-Americans. I get that. I understand that. But I'd rather lose than watch kids play the way some kids play. I'd rather lose. And they're allowed to get away with just whatever. And they're always thinking about themselves. Me. I didn't score, so why should I be happy? I'm not getting enough minutes. Why should I be happy? That's the world that we live in today, unfortunately. And kids check the scoreboard sometimes because they're going to get yelled at by their parents if they don't score enough points. Don't get me started. So when I look at my team, they know this. When I watch game film, I'm checking what's going on the bench. And if somebody's asleep over there, somebody doesn't care, somebody's not engaged in the game, they will never get in the game. Ever. And they know that. They know I'm not kidding.
Now, there's a lot to say about this video. When we talk about the way that we support athletes, we have to consider a couple pieces at play. I find that in the way that he's describing influence is something that's so important that we don't talk about these days is psychological safety for young people is directly affected by the environment that they're exposed to. What they're told to do, how they're told to do it, what they see online. And so when we're talking specifically about social media influence, and I'm going to talk about social media influence a little bit later on psychological safety in reference to college sports. But when we talk about social media influence, it's important to consider what they see an athlete being versus what it really is. And I think that happens in the workplace too. We see what a job is, but we don't really know the ins and outs of a job until we get there. And the other piece of psychological safety that he's talking about is the influence of your teammates, how they feel about you, how they support your development. If they're excited for you, proud of you, celebrating you, even though they're not in the game. And maybe there is someone that is sitting on the bench that needs to have a revised body language so that they can show their support. But also, how are people in the game supporting people on the bench? And there's further that conversation about the influence of parents and recognizing that we have so many different stakeholders contributing to our psychological safety and our expectations that we need that collective interest going forward so that we are understanding not only that people are influenced from various factors and facets of our lives, but if we want to create psychological safety, we need to do so collectively moving forward where people are recognized. Maybe their parents are saying you need to get so many points. Maybe they have a family member at home that's saying you need a salary raise, you deserve that job promotion, or you should leave your company. Maybe people have other factors. We do. We have 8+ billion people in the world who all live unique lives with unique identities and experiences who have those individual needs. And those needs may not be recognized, valued, and validated in their spaces. And they're told, sit there and smile from the bench. Or they're on the court and they're told, you should be happy because you're on the court. And there's a lot of different pieces that factor in here that make people good team players in athletics and in the workplace. Let's look at another one on that body language piece. And I think this one's really important because it also talks about mental toughness. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler here. Mental toughness is psychological safety. So let's take a look at it.
Some of it is how you think. Give an example. We had a kid here in 2012 that went 1 for 8 or 1 for 7 in the national championship game and walked in at halftime and was tough enough to say, I can't make a shot. I'm going to get every rebound and I'm going to block every ball. Duran, you score. Darius, make shots. Michael, you guys go do it. Marcus T, go do your thing. I'm going to do mine, blocking and rebounding. That's a tough player. So in versus walking in with a body language that I can't make a shot today, I can't believe this, and looking for, you have no toughness. You have no toughness. Tough player deals with what's there and responds to it. So I'm talking a lot about body language because body language screams. It screams for everybody to see. Head down, this. And in most cases, it's an immaturity thing, but the second part of it is a little lack of toughness, mental toughness, that I'm not getting broken down because I missed a couple shots, or I fumbled a ball, or I missed a free throw. I don't care. I'm tough. I didn't think I had to teach them this, but I pulled out the toughness sheet, and we read what toughness is. And as I read them to them, are we that? No. Are we this? No. Are we that? No. Are we this? No. Do we talk? No. And so my point to them is how we think has to change if you want how you're playing to change, how you approach this stuff. So I've had to do this with every team, probably more so with this team, but I've not had a team this young before.
Now, this is an old video, and the coach has moved on to other teams and currently is with Arkansas. And so, what I find interesting about this is 8 years ago, we're having conversations about mental toughness, and we know so much since. And so we can take what is learned in this situation and apply it to the changing demographics and changing experiences that athletes are having. And the conversation around mental toughness is interesting because it's similar to the conversation about resilience. And I for a long time supported the conversation about resilience, saying that we need to build better people and you need to be stronger and be more able to adapt and build the capacity to overcome. And I'm not saying you don't, because I know there's going to be pushback in this conversation about toughness versus psychological safety, and saying that you do have to develop the skills of the individual. And 100%, I do think you need to build good coping skills, good coping strategies, self-development, and you need to do that as well. But conversations around self-efficacy and confidence and self-esteem are directly tied to emotional intelligence, one, and psychological safety, two. When we talk about psychological safety, we're talking about someone's ability to develop that self-esteem and someone's ability to develop that confidence. And if you don't have an environment that is going to help develop that, then you can struggle with that mental toughness or that lack of resilience. So for instance, you're going to teach someone toughness in athletics, that if you miss a shot, you just try again and you try again and you develop and you try again. the mental toughness is that you're going to get back out there and do it, and you're not going to let yourself be down about missing that shot. The psychological safety piece is that you have a coach and you have teammates that are going to support you in that development process. Recognize that there may be a barrier, whether it's a mental barrier, a physical barrier, a skills development barrier. You're going to look at it from that four-part model, the skills and knowledge development, but also the competence and confidence and motivation element. You want to make sure that they have that confidence and that motivation to succeed, which is that mental toughness or that resilience. And that comes from psychological safety, being seen, heard, and valued. If you're constantly getting ridiculed and made fun of, then it's going to be hard to have that confidence that I'm going to make that shot this time. I can do better. I will be better. In the workplace, this is parallel to conversations about resilience. When we talk about resilience, there's conversations surrounding people's stress management or their ability to adapt and overcome, their flexibility. When we talk about equity deserving groups or people who are experiencing marginalization, maybe they have harassment and discrimination in the workplace. Telling someone to toughen up, telling someone to be resilient and develop that strength. Yes, sure, it is a piece of it, but you can't keep telling someone to fix themselves in a system that's broken. So you can have a really bad coach and a really great player that's going to break down that player. You can have a really good employee in a really bad workplace. It's going to break down that employee. And no matter of toughness or resilience is going to break that cycle and allow that person to thrive exponentially in those places. They'll leave or they'll crumble. And that's an important piece to address in both areas, whether it's in athletics or in a workplace. You have to draw those parallels. And I mean, for a lot of professional athletes, right, that is their workplace. And so we're talking about how people are treated in a space where they're compensated for the environment that they're in and how much do they deserve and to go through or be put through for that compensation. And the reality is it's a two-way street. People are compensated for experiencing whatever they experience on the field, in their workplace, whatever. But if you want that organization to thrive, whether it's a sports team looking for a championship or a workplace trying to innovate and develop the next product, you have to have people who are psychologically safe so that they can contribute. You don't want them having increased risk. You don't want quality defects in your products. You don't want that stagnation in your innovation. You need comprehensive perspectives, looking at problems from all angles so that people can solve it. You want a whole team having a conversation about how to win the next game. And the same thing is you want a whole team talking about how to be better as an organization, supporting product development or innovation in whatever capacity that there is. I think there's a lot of coaches out there that do this very successfully. And Steve Kerr is one of them. And so I want to show you a quick video about his conversation in terms of building the why, because I think building the why is something we forget to do. And it's that investment that people need of why they're there, why they want to be there, and why they want to contribute to the success of an organization beyond their own individual values. Why do they want to be there? Well, maybe they're getting a paycheck. Maybe they want this to be a celebrity. They want the fame. Maybe it's a stepping stone, whatever. The organization also needs to build the why because that's what keeps people there, keeps people invested, and it keeps people involved. And when someone is involved and invested, it means they're contributing to the development and success of that organization. If they don't have that, then they're just complacent to the growth. They are getting their paycheck, getting their celebrity status, whatever it is. So let's watch this video and see what you think about it.
The urge is, you're the coach, you want to control it, but coaching is not controlling it; it's guiding. When I first started with the Warriors, my first day of practice would have been about October 1st or something. So it's only been 2 months. But it was a little overwhelming because I had all these ideas. I wanted to cut back on turnovers. I wanted to be better offensively. I wanted to get better ball movement. And the first day of practice, it's just helter-skelter. It's crazy. And I'm thinking, how am I going to get control of these guys? And I realized quickly that I wasn't going to be able to. That it wasn't going to happen by me saying, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's like, steering a cruise ship or something. If you got to go over that way, it's going to take you a while to get there. but it takes everybody's participation to get the ship pointed in the right direction. So what I try to do is just continue to communicate our vision and then sort of gently nudge guys along.
And I think when we're talking about communicating the vision, that's an important piece here is the regular communication of why we're going this way, why this is our path forward. When you start off at the beginning, he says it's not about control, it's about guiding people. And I find that that is probably the biggest difference between athletic spaces and other workspaces because you're developing players to perform. And in workplaces, you're developing people to perform under supervision. And the under supervision piece is so challenging. It's such a big barrier and hurdle to the success of an organization. Giving people autonomy is so valuable to their success. There's some organizations are doing that right now where they're giving people less surveillance, less supervision, and giving them the trust that they're going to succeed based on whatever their expectations are. When we switched to remote work and even hybrid environments, that kind of had to come. And now some of the organizations are pulling that in really quick, where they're starting to assess what people's screen time usage is, or they're forcing regular check-ins, or they're really just bringing people back to office because they don't trust what they're doing at home. And when we don't trust what people are doing, or we don't create an environment where people do what they're supposed to do, we're removing that autonomy from them. And a lot of that has to do with accountability. Some people are getting away with more things than others. And so we don't have that accountability piece, and it kind of snowballs into a big, messy situation. In athletics, we see the same environment where people have autonomy. They can do whatever they want, but their performance is in real time. And we see it on the court or on the racetrack right in front of us. And when we're seeing that happen, it becomes very apparent that they can manage themselves or they can't. In the workplace, we haven't created those accountability pathways and that transparency pathway where people can contribute on their own, have their autonomy, and kind of be involved in that process. And that goes back to that vision. If people want to succeed for their organization, they will. But if they don't have that psychological safety, they're not bought in, then they're not going to be doing that. And that's when people waste time, do their dishes during the workday, or do laundry, or have their mouse scrolling attached to a fan. That is the type of behavior that is responsive to an unsafe environment, because a safe environment that supports the autonomy of individuals is going to have them contributing and supporting. Now, let's look at 3 athletic examples. I'm going to look at NASCAR. I'm going to look at college football. Specifically, I'm going to look at the Longhorns. And I also want to look at gymnastics. As we are entering the Winter Olympics, I think it's important to talk about individuals in sport as well as larger team sports. And so we're going to look at these 3 examples and talk about how psychological safety cannot exist in some of these spaces, and what it does to the athlete and what that means for your workplace. So the first one we're going to talk about is we're going to look at 2 examples from NASCAR, which are Denny Hamlin and Bubba Wallace. Let's take a look at the first video. So a really big piece that affects me with the conversation around Bubba Wallace and NASCAR is that I experienced this in real time in my own life. Having experienced this as an individual, when you're looking at your lived experience of racism, growing up in the United States, and having my own life experiences with discrimination, and then watching how it plays out in the life of other people becomes very challenging. The piece that if I find most important here is that Bubba Wallace talks about athletes being human beings. And that is something that sometimes we forget and sometimes limits the ability to develop psychological safety for athletes. So, in the sense of psychological safety, people needing to be seen, heard, and valued, they're now compounded with the experience of the social realities of our world, cultural realities, political realities. And all of that is a piece of who they are as a human. It's also a piece of who they are as an athlete. So for myself, the big challenge that I faced during the last 5 years was that I'm combating my own personal experiences, wanting to be valued and validated while advocating for the experiences of others, and all while managing the public response, the political response, the cultural response to the same thing. So I'm not just absorbing the realities of my own experience and making judgment for myself. I'm now absorbing the realities of other people's experiences, and I'm absorbing all of the perspectives online because I now am either being validated or not being validated. And that impacts the individual's psychological safety. And that psychological safety carries outward into sports itself. The other example from NASCAR I wanted to talk about is the experiences of Denny Hamlin. In the NASCAR documentary series on Netflix, there's a number of examples where Denny talks about his experiences of psychological safety without naming psychological safety. So that black cloud that kind of follows him around, the bad luck that he has, the bad experiences that he has. And when we start to get into those spaces of the bad things are always happening to me, the bad things will always happen to me, that has an impact on our psychological safety. And whether it's true or not, if someone has good luck or bad luck, that becomes a front of mind experience because now we've created a narrative that is harmful to ourselves. And that narrative is based on the environment that we live in. I've been told before that I create this narrative where everything's going wrong and everything's going bad for me. And it is because that's what we focus on when we're in a bad psychological space, when we have bad psychological safety, because maybe our environment isn't supporting us. Maybe the people around us aren't supporting us. Maybe it's the larger social media network that's not supporting us. It's that impact on our self-esteem, our confidence, and our ability to be positive, stay positive, and be resilient. And so we're not being seen, heard, valued, validated, acknowledged. We're not given that opportunity to thrive and succeed in those spaces because now it has weighed down on us mentally. And that is something that has started to become more of a conversation in sports and maybe kind of a conversation in the workplace. And it's so critically important because just as much as physical safety is important, your psychological safety affects your physical safety. And so if you're not psychologically safe, you're engaging in riskier behavior, you're making more mistakes, and you're putting yourself and other people at risk as well. So I want to talk about another example, and I want to look at Texas Longhorns quarterback Arch Manning, who is a legacy football player with a family dynasty of football players who has entered this world of you have to be the best. And there's no other question but you being the best because everyone else in your family is the best. And if you're not the best, then there's something wrong with you. And that stems from all of these different influences that we've talked about. Your schooling influences you. The people around you influence you. The media influence you. Everyone that contributes to that conversation about who you are, how successful you are, it makes you feel like you are on top of the world. And it can also put you down so significantly that affects your performance. I want to watch this video, and it's just a highlight of the media really recognizing the importance for Arch Manning to succeed and really what the impact that can be on his performance.
Analysts out there that were saying he is the next great one. How can you make that assessment when he hasn't been playing like that? He's not that good. Not saying he won't be good, not saying he won't be great, but right now, he's not that good. He's not even the best quarterback in the state of Texas.
Ladies and gentlemen, we may be watching Arch Manning's football career end before it even begins. Arch Manning had sky-high expectations entering his sophomore year at Texas, but over the first 3 weeks of the college football season, he's done nothing but tank his own stock, and that is not an exaggeration. For a five-star prospect who has the last name of some football legends, Manning has not lived up to the hype at all whatsoever, and this very well could be the beginning of the end of his NFL hopes and dreams. Now, of course, it's just 3 games into his career, but if you compare him to his uncles, he's definitely off to a rockier start.
And when we talk about the comparative nature of sports, especially when you're a legacy, you can see the impact. But could you imagine being a football player from a family of incredible football players and you're basically brought up in the life of being that next great football player? Same as Tiger Woods' son, the same as any legacy athlete that is entering a space. I'd say any legacy in general that's entering the college world after a parent, or if you're a legacy in a workplace because you joined the company because your parents work at the company, or you join your own parents' company. We see that immense pressure put on people because there's an expectation of them. And that expectation is going to then influence their psychological safety because they may not feel comfortable asking for help, asking for support, or stepping out of a position of leadership or high expectation because their fear of disappointing people, disappointing themselves, or not performing to that expectation. The irony of Arch Manning being in the leadership program at the University of Texas is that he's learning how to be in a position that he's been expected to be in his whole life. He entered the team not just in a position of leadership or team leadership or kind of an inspiration, but his name itself is a leadership position. He's been given the opportunity to influence people socially because of who he is. And he's still developing those skills alongside having to deal with the immense pressure and lack of psychological safety that he's given. I find that the biggest challenge at the beginning of the season was that he kind of just looked dead inside. There's a lot of pictures and images of his face during games, even in media photos, where he just looks dead inside, like he's struggling and he just wants like a big hug, or he just needs someone to say like, you're doing fine, you're going to be okay. And that's a big barrier for some athletes in these positions because conversations about mental health, conversations about struggling, not being good enough, needing to ask for help is so challenging because they're put in an environment where they can't ask for help because asking for help is a weakness. The same thing happens in the workplace when we have people who are expected to succeed or expected to do great things or be great people. Because they have this immense pressure on them, they don't have the ability to say, I need help. I don't understand. I'm not getting it. I need extra time. Because that is now seen as a weakness of that high expectation they have. And when they're not meeting those expectations, the hard pressure they put on themselves is so impacting. So when we look at players like this, or we look at workplaces that are creating environments like this, we need to take a step back and say, how can we support that individual's mental development? How can we support the environment development so that they're given that validation and acknowledgement of what they're going through and not just continuing to put pressure? Because Arch Manning's not just facing the pressure of his name. He's facing the pressure of his teammates. He's facing the pressure of coaching staff, of the university. He's facing that pressure of the fan base and every other person that has a say, whether they know anything or not, about who he is and what he's doing, including myself in this conversation right now. It's pressure of understanding what other people think, how they're valuing and validating a person, and what that can do to the individual. And I want to bring one more example up of mental health and psychological safety, and that's Simone Biles. As we enter the Winter Olympics, I think it's really important, again, to talk about mental health, and mental health is tied to psychological safety. As someone who's experienced psychological safety impacts on my mental health, that disconnect between mind and body is so powerful. Because one day you can be really energetic and engaged and focused, and other days you can be completely disconnected. And going back to that idea of skills and knowledge, confidence and motivation and that disconnect, you're going to see the example right here. I'm going to show you two videos. The first video I'm going to show you is a news report on Simone Biles getting the twisties. And the second one is after she come out recognizing that these twisties were tied to mental health. So let's look at the first one.
In Tokyo, saying that she has a case of the twisties. For the non-gymnastics people, here's a look at what that means. Gymnasts have a sense of air awareness when they are doing a skill that gets disconnected. There's a short circuit between what their brain is experiencing and the muscle memory and what their bodies are doing. That's bad for a couple reasons. One, it'll just steal your confidence. Gymnasts at this level are doing the hardest gymnastics that we see, and to not be able to do that is very disorienting. Two, it's actually really dangerous. When they do vault, when they do floor, they're 8-10 feet in the air. So to lose your awareness and fall, you risk serious injury. So how can you fix them? What can you do? The main thing is soft surfaces. Here in Tokyo, at the competition venue, there's only the hard apparatus that they would use during the competition. But it seems that Simone has found a gym locally where she can try to do her skills into foam pits or onto soft mats to address them. On her Instagram, Simone said that this normally only happens to her on floor and vault. And usually, and since she came to Tokyo, this has been a problem for her on all 4 apparatuses. She said on her Insta story that usually it takes 2 weeks for this to go away, and that's longer than the competition schedule here in Tokyo.
Now, I think it's so interesting that, yes, the reporter does talk about the experience of the disconnect, that the response to it is very surface level because it's what's the number one risk, safety, and so let's put some foam mats down. And yes, that is a response. But when we respond to psychological safety in the workplace, a lot of it is that surface level response. There's an expose kind of conversation right now about an organization in Canada that created a crying room. And when we talk about creating a crying room, why aren't we looking at the root cause of that crying? So when you look at the twisties, we talk about it's that disconnect between the skills and knowledge and the confidence and motivation, which is tied to the environment, to the psychological safety, which affects mental health. We can't just put a crying room in because someone feels unsafe. We can't just put a foam mat down because someone feels unsafe, because there's that disconnect there. I want to show you the second video, which brings up the interview with Simone Biles talking about the twisties and what this really means in getting into her head about that psychological safety piece.
Speaking like never before about the mental health struggle that forced her to withdraw from events at the Tokyo Olympics and the year of the trauma that led up to that moment. Lara has the details. Good morning, Lara.
Good morning to you, Michael. So, 4-time Olympic gold medalist Simone talks about how a physical injury would have been easier to explain and for people to understand. A mental health issue is something it felt like, at least to her, that very few could relate to.
America hates me. The world is going to hate me. And I can only see what they're saying on Twitter right now.
This morning, gymnastics goat Simone Biles opening up like never before about the mental health battle she faced at the Tokyo Summer Olympics in 2021 that led her to withdraw from multiple events.
I would literally tell my teammates, like, I'm fighting demons. I'm fighting demons right now. So I literally felt like I was fighting my body and my mind to do these tricks.
The 4-time Olympic gold medalist sitting down with Alex Cooper on the Call Her Daddy podcast on Wednesday, talking about her decision to remove herself from the women's gymnastics all-around final after experiencing what she called the twisties.
It's basically like your mind and your body is at a disconnect. Your body is going to try to do something and your mind is going to be like, no, you're not doing this. That's kind of how it feels like. You've been doing something for so long and you now no longer have control.
So when we're talking about this environment specifically, and we look at the experience that Simone Biles had, I think it's really important to address that disconnect and how mental health is affected by psychological safety, because you lose control of your response. Your mental health is affecting your physical engagement. And in athletics and gymnastics, it's very dangerous, but then we can talk about that also in any other sport. We talk about that riskier behavior, the lack of coordination, the loss of muscle memory, because people are impacted mentally by the environment that they're in. In the workplace, we're looking at these same risks. We talk about healthcare malpractice. You look at manufacturing mistakes. All of this can result from an environment that is not safe for the individual. And so just looking at these examples and talking about what we can learn from sports, we really need to address how we're supporting people and how we're supporting them to contribute to the conversation about psychological safety, how coaches and individuals in the workplace can become better supporters of psychological safety, a conversation that we don't have that often, and what we can do to be an innovative space relating to our well-being. So what are we doing with this information? We need to take learning from theory to practice. We need to have conversations about how we're making these abstract theories in learning, in adult education, into everyday practice in the workplace, and how we're doing that in a sustainable way. We also need to look at how we're creating environments for people to succeed. We need to look at how we're supporting people's physical safety and psychological safety, because you can have high pressure environments, but pressure without safety means nothing. Thank you so much for joining me this week. And just remember, Beyond the Playbook isn't about having all the answers. It's about having honest conversations about the barriers that we face in our spaces. New episodes drop every Wednesday, and I encourage you to also read our Signals and Patterns monthly and our Learning Seasons quarterly at diversesolutions.ca. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you learning.